All right, clock is going, so it looks like we'll run out of time here in 29 minutes and a few seconds here. So firstly, I want to thank Dan Rayburn and the Streaming Summit team for helping put this on. I also want to thank John for joining today. As you guys can see here on the slide, this is the AI room, I think, because I've been in here a couple times today. So we'll be talking about specifically to AI, how publishers are maximizing efficiency in media and content supply chain. And before we do that, we'll do some quick intros. Let's start with you, John.
Sure. John Footen. I've been in media and entertainment for 40 years, I guess. 1993 was my first NAB. So I've been doing this for a while, and I look forward to talking about yet the latest thing that we have as a trend in the industry.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Adrian Bolosan. I'm an industry principal at Snowflake. For those that are not familiar with Snowflake, I think many of the folks in this room probably are, but one of our most mature and larger verticals at Snowflake is media, entertainment, and advertising that we now call the Media Data Cloud. So that obviously circulates everything around media, including things like media supply chain, which many of our large, I think, shared customers are here today kind of participating, some of which were speaking earlier today. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so we thought we'd make this kind of fun. As John and I have been having conversations, we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution and modernization of the media supply chain. Before we get to AI, of course, how did we get here? We were talking to this through the lens of kind of the 1.0, the 2.0, and the 3.0. So if you go to the next slide,
This was, by the way, my childhood picture.
Yeah, I actually took that from John. I was like, do you have something? So we're calling and we could probably split hairs a little bit on the dates on how we have these set up, depending on who came from what part of media supply chain and their backgrounds. But I think this is pretty close to accurate as far as where we looked at this transformation. So starting off with the 1.0 is we talked about kind of analog to digital, or as you called it, getting to the internet.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So let's start there a little bit, John, and kind of that transformation a bit.
For sure. So we actually had an interesting discussion in the lead up preparing for this about what is digital, right? Because I've heard that word used my entire career in those 40 years. So when did we go digital? So the definition here for today's purposes is internet, right? When the internet and the potential for one-to-one streaming became a reality. Prior to that, we started off in a purely mechanical, electronic, analog world, and everything that we did was creating for large audiences. It was rare to create something for one, right, in anything that you did. We then, when the internet came along, we had this is also the era, as you see here in 2010, we had migrated much of the media supply chain to something that was actually digital, not the internet, but digital video, and we were able to use computers to do the job, right? The entirety of getting computers in place, I would say arguably by 2010, we were finally mostly retiring videotape and film. It's not gone yet, believe it or not. There are still some clients out there that still have a videotape or two that they're dealing with. But the vast majority of that retiring only happened in 2010. So it's not been that long that we have had computerized, almost entirely computerized workflows available for media companies. And so one of the points I wanted to make today is that when I jump ahead here to this AI era, I hear, as someone who went through that transition from physical videotape and film to the computer itself, I hear the same exact discussions happening about fear, about what the possibilities are, but also what the fear is. I can't tell you how many times in the late 80s or early 90s, as we started to put computers to do any of these jobs, that people said that's going to destroy all the jobs and there's going to be nothing left afterwards and the creativity is going to be destroyed, and just all of these kinds of things that we hear again in regards to AI. And it is my opinion that the end result, and I guess we'll get to some of this here in a second, the end result of the application of these trends is not going to be any of the fears nor all of the hopes that people have about the technology, that we will have something in between as we have at every transition of technology.
Great, and I think we talk about, before we get to AI, is just the whole cloud transformation. I think what's really teed us up well for AI today, and is kind of, a lot of those legacy systems, to your point, turning digital and then migrating to the cloud. But the big part we kind of talked about was the development of, actually the compute power and the hardware to kind of power this next evolution of AI. So like cloud was a huge part of that. We always talk about big data, which we'll touch a little bit
about.
Yeah,
I mean, you need a core infrastructure to achieve the AI models that we're talking about today. And migrating the media workflows to cloud has put the media to be surrounded by the most powerful compute storage infrastructure that exists out there. If we were still doing this by capital purchases on our own, I doubt that much of the experimentation would be occurring that we're actually seeing happen with AI. So it was an absolute predicate for AI to be introduced into the industry that we moved the content to cloud for the most part, because that's where we're going to have the power to process it.
Yep. We joked around about what to call it. We called it AI at scale because AI obviously isn't new. You were talking about when AI was first introduced in kind of your career, but really at scale today and what's kind of possible. You talked about your kind of deja vu moment, right? Like going from digital or analog to digital, kind of seeing that, feeling that same kind of reminiscent of, AI, like you said, jobs getting lost, the kind of fear factor.
Yeah, let me talk about that again, just to reiterate that point. When, let's just say 1992, 1993, the first year I went to NAB, there were computer-based video editing systems that were available. The first video playout servers were available to play a video from a computer at broadcast quality. And there was a lot of discussion about the jobs that would kill. What do you need a VTR operator for, a tape op, if you have a computer to play back the video? If you can edit it on a videotape, edit the video on a computer, then what's the job of the assistant editor? The person who's been prepping all the physical stuff for the editor to use. The reality is we didn't lose any jobs. We just changed jobs. Specific jobs went away. Lots more jobs got created of different types. And I don't see that changing in regards to AI. In fact, the other thing we did is go watch a football game from 1993 and then go watch a football game today, and you will see a massively more complicated broadcast. It is far more sophisticated in what we're producing. The actual content in terms of what we produce is so much more because we have all these technologies that enable it. AI will do the same thing. It will enable more complexity, more interesting content, more personalization of the content, which I'm sure we'll get into, and it will enable even new genres of content that we don't have today. One quick note is that I tell people that if it wasn't for videotape coming along, we never would have had reality television because nobody could have afforded it in film, right? So these technology changes result in things you can't predict. Nobody was predicting reality TV, trust me. But AI is going to create new things, new creative options that we just don't even have today that I can't predict.
Agreed. Next, maybe jump to the next slide if you could. So obviously with this show, all the AI kind of subjects, there's no excitement about the possibilities of AI. But I think in a lot of the conversations we're having with our shared customers, there's definitely some trends and challenges depending on the view. So I want to just call out some of those. The first one I wanted to call out was just around kind of maintaining data or IP governance, right? So a lot of the large media publisher organizations are creating these kind of formal bodies made up across multiple personas across the organization. So that's obviously security, data governance, legal, engineering. And these groups combined are really putting more of a formal process around, well, like, What are the applications of that? What are the risks of that? So they're, I think, being very methodical about that, and that's smart. The next piece, which you and I talked about a lot, was kind of costs and resources, right? For organizations to stand up modern architecture to power a lot of the AI and LLM type use cases, it's costly. And if anyone's paying attention to kind of what Dan was saying earlier today around economics of these media companies, as Dan waves, is they're being cost conscious around this, right? So it's a high barrier to entry, essentially, as far as cost. The other area we kind of talked about was validating business value. It's definitely we call it the era of heavy experimentation. A lot of folks are testing, they're experimenting, but really I think technology teams and business and commercial teams are really trying to align on, like, if we're gonna make these decisions, what is it actually gonna produce for us, right? And there's been a debate. Is it gonna save costs? Is it gonna create new revenue streams for us? Is it gonna make us more productive? Like, kind of where do I start? And then the last one I'll leave to you, because we always joked around about this, about data foundation and...
Yeah, it's absolutely critical to do any new technology, but especially AI, that you have a foundational structure of data that is good. And by that I mean data quality, I mean data governance. These things in most media organizations are not very mature. And if we don't fix that, it doesn't matter whether AI ever came along or not. That was creating problems in old systems. Yeah. And AI is not going to automatically fix that. In fact, AI will enhance the problems if you don't get the data governance right within your environments. One thing I'll say, there's a topic that not everyone knows about, perhaps people in this room do, but you've heard the term LLM, right, in regards to AI, but there's also retrieval augmented generation, RAG, and that is in fact, speaking of echoes, it's much more likely that something like RAG is going to be valuable to you than the general LLM approach to AI. Because what RAG is, for anyone who might not know, is it's a model in which prior to going to the LLM to generate whatever it is you're generating, it will retrieve, that's the retrieval part, it will retrieve relevant information to your answer from your data set. So if you're generating images out of your library, it will look at what your characters should look like, or if it's out of another kind of data set, it'll look up what, if let's say you're producing a drama show, it will know what age the character is and all these other things as it writes the script, for example. But it will look at a set of data, gather a bunch of answers, that's the retrieval part, and then it will augment the prompt with that data in addition to whatever it is that you had typed in. So that creates a much more potentially accurate and predictable result. And predictability is probably one of the biggest challenges to AI in my mind. Being able to give a problem to the AI and get a proper response that is predictable is probably one of the things that we're going to require for true enterprise scale business use in all kinds of different ways. I think that this is the echo part. What we're going to see, and there's plenty of people here who could disagree with me, I'm making a prediction. What we're going to see with AI is we're going to see the models get smaller, and we're going to see everything shrink down to reusable components that do specific things that are very much more predictable. In order to get away from many of the problems that we see today, we're going to do that. And the echo part for me is, for any of you who are software developers, this is moving down to a service orientation or breaking things into components so that we can orchestrate them. We're going to orchestrate our AIs to get to the final result. So while there will always be a place for the big picture internet scraping types of LLMs, I think the real use cases that are going to be most effective in our industry are going to be use cases where we've shrunk it down to a smaller set of problems and orchestrated a series of AIs to do something.
You jump to the next slide. So real quick, I wanted to kind of set some context before we get into some of the use cases we're going to share across media companies. Is kind of the approach of Snowflake, for those that are familiar, since our kind of inception to cloud infrastructure, what Snowflake has always done is really extract the complexity. Some of those challenges I kind of mentioned before, Snowflake is investing in developing our product to do the same thing around AI. So not to get too busy on an eye chart here for you, but we're going to focus around kind of what we call Snowpark Container Services, which is on the right-hand side you'll see up here. At the bottom here, we talked about some of the concerns around data governance and models. And really what Snowflake is doing is continuing to preserve data governance for our customers. But you can jump to the next one. This will dive a little bit deeper. Really with Snowpark Container Services on Snowflake, what we're doing is allowing our customers to maintain their data and IP governance, meaning data is not exposed to the open web of LLMs out there. We're either partnering or natively integrating kind of best-in-class AI, LLM models natively in Snowflake. So think about applications and services and solutions coming to Snowflake, something we've done for a while. We're doing the same thing with the AI ecosystem. And then we talked about the cost to spin up infrastructure for AI LLM can be costly, high barrier to entry. Snowflake, obviously through partnerships with like NVIDIA, et cetera, we actually have kind of GPU on demand to power these use cases, right? And it could be many, many different use cases. Some examples, of course, could be like, text generation, RAG, as you mentioned, chatbots, et cetera. So this is how we're simplifying it and really kind of lowering the barrier to entry for our customers to kind of test like we were talking about earlier. So I have one more technology slide, but we'll get into that in a second. If you can go to the next one.
I will just say while you're getting to the next slide that one thing you just said that I think is really important is you need a place to test and play.
Yeah.
You need a place that you can trust to go and have your data and do these experiments in a way that is cost effective. And buying a massive GPU set of equipment might not be the easiest thing to get past your budget, and working with another party is sometimes a good way to do that.
Great. All right, so we'll get into some of the fun stuff. We've been having discussions across our teams and shared customers around kind of a couple different areas. We didn't have an hour with you guys, so we wanted to kind of narrow down like what were some of the kind of hot areas that we're discussing. So we kind of boiled it down to kind of 3 we'll touch on today. I'll touch on the first one, John, around advertising. I think this was actually brought up earlier today in this room, is specific to advertising and the power of AI. Really some of the areas we're kind of been focusing on with media companies is being able to produce or being more effective in producing the creative production process, specific around TV, CTV, and addressable, and kind of really lowering the barrier to entry for organizations that typically didn't have the funds to be able to do this. I think there was a whole session on this earlier today, so that's definitely one area. Anything?
Well, let me add to that because I think it's really important. So advertising has the potential to blow up, and I use that word actually beyond the financial advertising. So promotion, corporate videos for convincing people of things. A lot of this stuff is relatively low quality today, or in the case of, say, local television, it's too expensive to produce something of the quality that the audience expects. And what these tools that we can now have with AI will allow you to do is to move through a production process much more cost effectively from the proposal stage through to the actual content creation stage, much more cost effectively so that you can actually get high quality content out there, whether it be local television or corporate video or any of those other areas that you are trying to produce content. I really do think that in the near term, this area is going to be one of big explosive growth in terms of the value of AI tools. It's just helping us get stuff done for those types of use cases much more cost effectively.
Agreed. The next area we'll touch on, we've had very deep conversations around, there's always talks of personalization, but this is very specific to personalized live sports.
Yes. So let me just talk a little bit about it. So personalized sports has always been something we talked about, even before people used the term AI to talk about personalized sports. There's been, I don't even know how long ago, there were broadcasters that were showing different cameras in racing events and things like that. There was, you move around on your remote and find different angles. So there's always been a desire for more customized content because the sports fan is very interested in lots of data, very specific data. And the combination of cloud with AI is going to enable a new, more personalized, almost one-to-one sports experience that has not been possible to date. Down to the stats you care about, the players you care about, the sports you care about. I think we're going to see an explosion of this kind of stuff. And one of the interesting oddities that's going to be an interesting challenge for the industry is that in order to be more personalized, whatever the content type is, but we're using sports here as the example, you're going to have an audience that trusts you to give the data to you for you to then personalize. And so that's one of the major things. They need to know that your data governance is such that they can trust you with that data, because otherwise you can't provide them the experience that they want. So we're going to have that tension between personalization and trust that is going to have to be overcome as we look to make these experiences even more incredible. How much data will customers be willing to give up in order to create an even more personal experience?
I think the power you said with cloud is bringing disparate data sets together through the cloud, and then obviously overlaying kind of AI on top of that. We'll share some architecture on the next one here, but before we get to that, let's talk about news content gravity, which I know is a hot topic for us.
So content gravity, and I'm going to give it the news example, but you could imagine the same thing for just script writing in general, is this idea that as you work on your creative process, let's say in the case this is script writing, the AI is constantly providing suggestions to you as you're working about what it is that might be interesting for you to include or not include. It's not writing your script for you. It's not creating the news. So let's deal with news. There's a fire on Main Street. I mean, that's a real thing. It's not going to be generated as if it was, a fake story. But as I'm typing my script about the 5 o'clock, the fire on Main Street, it'll start pulling clips of fires. It'll start pulling clips of Main Street. It'll pull maps. It'll pull statistics about how many fires there were last year. So all of this data sources that we have, AI can use its ability to understand what we're trying to do to bring more. So actually, I would make the argument that, ironically, one of the things that AI is going to enable is more reality to be created because it's going to enable people to get the reality in a way that it has not been able to very easily before. So, that might be counter to what a lot of people are worried about. And obviously all the things that people are worried about with fake stuff is something to be concerned about. But I will argue that in the area of news, we're going to be able to use AI to help us tell more of the truth.
Agreed, kind of enabling, journalists, for example, in this, as a tool or functionality, to your point, link and find more reality.
And the gravity part, just to talk about why I use the term content gravity, is that the more relevant it is, the closer it comes to you as a content creator. So as I said, if I start typing about Main Street, at first, the picture, the graphic of the map might not be very relevant. But as I type about more and stuff that was happening around that area, it might become more relevant and it'll come closer to me in my imaginary UI. But I think it's a really important point. These tools, AI is not just generative. It is lots of things. It's lots of different technologies. There's not one AI technology. And so we're going to be able to use this power to actually make it easier for content creators, either from the left side of this screen with the advertising people and the creative process, all the way to the right side of the screen where we're trying to tell the truth. And we're going to use AI at all of those.
Awesome. If you can jump to the next slide, please. So this is kind of bringing it to life a little bit, and I can't take credit for building this slide. Our field CTO, Drew Holland here in the front row, actually built this masterpiece, but this is an actual data flow and reference architecture, what we're talking about. So I won't go through it. It's probably squinting for some folks in the back a little bit, but just from left to right, obviously showing kind of the data inputs, from metadata, customer data, streaming data, right? In the center here, obviously it allows, within Snowflake organizations to kind of transform and normalize and enrich the data. When we talk about enrichment, that's bringing your own data. Or on the top, you'll see things like the Snowflake Marketplace. This is a rich ecosystem of data providers. It could be existing partners of media companies that they already collaborate with. But ultimately, what we're showing here is in Snowflake, cross-cloud, cross-region, allowing our customers to be able to bring mass amounts of data, either their own data or data that they're potentially going to purchase or license from other organizations. And then we talked about Snowpark Container Services on the bottom. This is the power to be able to tap into kind of proprietary LLMs. That could be something, I think, examples would be something like Landing AI or Reka or something like that, where you can power LLMs from image to text to enrich things like metadata, or text to text if you're going to grow further metadata. But this is really specific to that personalized sports scenario that John and I were talking about. We were starting to draft up what does this actual architecture look like so we could bring it to life. And of course, on the right, downstream would be that, this streaming app experience. So that way, in John's household versus my household in the game, we're going to get a very different experience. So this is using not only just that true personalized data, but the metadata content, that storytelling data combined with that, which is kind of the next kind of iteration of this.
And it's important that you have the power, the processing power, both physical, but as well as software, smart software, because we want to keep the latency low, right? Sports fans don't want it to come an hour later.
Yes. Awesome. If you jump to the next one, I think we actually will have time for some questions here. Just going to kind of summarize a couple things, and then we can open up to a couple questions. So just 4 kind of summary points / takeaways. Talked about ease of use, right? So I think the barrier to entry from a perception for a lot of folks is it can be expensive, which it can be. You do need resources. Again, I think the Snowflake approach is to kind of abstract as much of that away as possible. There's obviously organizations that are going to invest in their own infrastructure because their business model, there's the return on investment for them to do that, sure. Right? But not for everybody. I think the flexibility, Snowflake, we don't buy and sell media, we don't buy and sell data, and we actually, we're not really in the LLM space, so we're always out there looking at what are best-in-class LLMs that we can bring to our platform. That's never going to change. And I think the last one I want to touch on as we look at kind of, you talk about protecting data and IP, we also view that as a huge opportunity for organizations to monetize their data and IP. But how do you monetize that and also protect it? It's got to be done in a governed way. We're seeing more and more kind of, traditional news publishers that are taking checks from LLM companies so they can feed these models. We think that that's going to probably transition. Folks are going to be a little bit more conservative about that approach before they take those checks from the large technology companies. And I think some of the technologies we talked about today will kind of protect some of those approaches.
100%.
Yeah. All right, I think we have a couple minutes for any questions. Don't be shy.
So do you think that what I said about using AI to tell more truth? I saw some skepticism in the audience when I said that. See, one of the things I just, please somebody raise their hand and ask any question, but one of the reasons I like to say that is because people get confused with AI. They think that AI is Gen AI. It's not. I mean, it is Gen AI as a thing, but that is not all AI is. I mean, we could have a whole debate on whether AI even exists yet. I mean, that's probably a marketing thing that has been, I've lost at this point.
Yeah.
But these technologies have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think that we can make good use of them to bring good information to the creators, the content creators, get them the right stuff, whether it's creative stuff or facts or whatever, and use that to create even better, more accurate content.
Great. All right, if we don't, we got a hand raiser back there.
Taking the live sports example, just a question, do you think there's a point where, because one of the things that's most powerful about live sports is the sense of community that it drives, right? Is that you know that, around the world, fans of the same team as you are watching the game in the same moment, experiencing the same thing, which is very rare these
there's a risk of losing that sense of community that is what drives the whole live sports ecosystem
It's an
generally?
amazing question. It's actually a really, really good question because it comes down to genre. So I don't personally think that we'll get away from the community experience of sports, right? Like if personalized versions come along, people will still consume in great numbers the community master version of it. I think that one of the interesting futures for people who are going to film school or art school now or television production school is the question of what it means to direct something. All right, when you're directing something that can be generated, how are you directing, right? What parameters? It's more akin to games than it is to the linear storytelling that we have done to date. And so if I'm directing a story of a game, a sporting event, there's a story. We all know this. We're professionals in this space. It's a story we're telling. And that story needs to carry through to each of those people. There are probably key moments that everyone needs to experience. Yeah. And I really look forward to the creatives of the future figuring out how these stories get told, because it's going to be different.
Awesome. Good question. Thanks again, John. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining us today.